another interesting experience that I want to share. I'm kind of a Milwaukee Brewer Cubs fan kind of guy, and they I think it was Friday. They had game two of the divisional playoffs between the Colorado Rockies and the Milwaukee Brewers. Anybody watch that game? Well, what I experienced was there's probably two or three, maybe more players on the Colorado Rocky team that went, they did things that made me think that they are shape-shifting reptilians. And there was one player who played out in the outfield who was, they put the camera on him. He had just taken the field after striking out or something, and the announcers announcing the game said it's really, really frustrating. And as they held the camera on this guy in the outfield, he started rocking his head back and forth, and then he turned his head sideways and then back looking upward, and he opened his mouth really wide and just made a big snarl. And it was just as if a reptilian was just ready to eat something. I mean, it was just unbelievable how his motion looked reptilian as he did that. And it was just, I mean, I wish I would have recorded it to show you guys. And then there was another guy who struck out, and he took one step from the plate after he struck out, and he broke the bat across his knee, broke it in half. And I'm just wondering what kind of people are playing on that team, you know, or what are they being influenced by? It was really, really kind of eye-opening. I don't recall ever seeing that sort of behavior before.
What about the one where the ears were growing and put the hat down? Tennis?
Oh yeah. I was watching. This had to be about 3 or 4 years ago or 5 years ago. They and I won't say his name to protect him on the air, but he was an announcer announcing one of the major tennis tournaments, and he was one of the leading tennis players that had won many of the major tournaments. And he became an announcer, and he was an announcer's booth announcing these tennis matches. And one day he came in, and his ears went from his jawline all the way up to about an inch from the top of his head. I mean, they must have been 6 inches across. And he had, you know, it was though he had to get to work, but he had not had a chance to, after shapeshifting, had not got back to his normal physical human form. And I thought that was a real eye-opening experience for me. But then there was another tournament this summer where one of the top tennis players, it was one of the biggest matches of the year, and this tennis player was playing, and all of a sudden he, right in the middle of the match, he had to quit playing tennis. He said he was injured and had to stop playing, and he put a cap on and wouldn't look up at the cameras. And he said he was injured, and he didn't want to his injury make it any worse. And of course, the audience was really upset because they paid $100 or more a ticket, and he quit halfway through the match. And then they had to interview him, you know, after the match, and he refused to look at the camera. He had a baseball cap on down over his eyes, so you couldn't see his eyes, and his ears were about were huge. it was like they were, once again, they were probably, you know, when he normally plays, his ears are standard size, like 3 inches for everybody, but his must have been 5 or 6 inches and growing.
Yeah, they kept growing.
And they kept getting bigger and bigger. And I told Sandy about it. She was here when I was watching that tennis match, and I said he apparently lost his ability to maintain his human form. He was shapeshifting into a reptilian and had to quit the match. And if he looked at the camera, you would have seen that his eyes had vertical slits like a typical reptilian, and he had to hide that from the camera while he was being interviewed. And he made the interview very short, and then he escaped back into the locker room and disappeared. So I thought that was kind of interesting too. So apparently, I would say that some of these sports figures are shape-shifting reptilians, and maybe that's how they got their position, because they have connections with the people running everything. So any comments on that?
Real fast, Bob. The announcer, I used to play a lot of tennis. I belonged to a club, etc. My younger days. Are his initials JM?
I think so.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about then?
Yeah.
He does. I was going to talk today. I was going to talk a little bit about dance and the body movements and how good it is for your body to move around. Sometimes we sit in front of the computer. Even when I sit to practice the piano or sing or do something, I look at the clock and I've been there for an hour and a half, and I need to get up and move or do something. You can sit too long, that's for sure. The body isn't made to do it, I don't think, that long. When I was a child, I began dance lessons, tap and ballet, when I was 5. And I continued until I was 13. I absolutely loved it. It's fun, especially when you get to pound out with the tap shoes and everything. Of course, in gym class, we always had to learn square dancing, and of course, nobody liked it too much. And later, I took ballroom, but it's to me, I like it better than I like aerobics. I would do it again. I would take tap again because it was so much fun. Probably be good for me too. There is a tap dance studio in Wausau. It's quite far from the house, but especially in the wintertime, but I may go sign up for that. I'll talk a little bit, since you mentioned American Indians. I was invited. Well, one of the corporation people was a friend of mine, and she taught the Hopi and the Navajo children at the Hopi Cultural Center in Window Rock, Arizona. And my husband, well, he's my ex-husband now, we were invited by her to view a dance that they do only every 100 years. And I thought, boy, this is really cool. So we booked a room reservation on their reservation at the Hopi Cultural Center. And as I'll just try to describe what I observed and saw, there is a big sweat lodge to the left of me. I'm sitting in the front row and with my husband, and the drumming starts, and one by one, these brown-skinned Indians with their bodies gleaming from the sweat, evidently, were coming out one by one out of the sweat lodge, and they had mask on, every one of them, and a loincloth, and they were coming out to the beat of the drum, and then they danced in front of us and sang and did the Indian chants for most of the afternoon. So it was a pretty thrilling time. And when Claudia was talking about the Indians, I immediately thought of them. And after the dance was over, we were going to go eat. And so we went. There was a restaurant in the same location that our rooms were, and all the electricity had gone out just before we arrived. So they they lit some candles, and I guess they had some type of lantern flashlights that they were using inside, but there was still light from the windows. But I think I had blue corn pancakes and something to drink. Thank goodness we had something to drink. It was pretty hot that day, sitting out in the sun all afternoon. And so, okay, we did that, and we went to bed. Of course, you don't need lights to do that. And in the middle of the night, I am woken up, and there is what appears to be an American Indian chief with his arms folded, and he's standing at the foot of the bed, and I wanted him to talk because who are you? But he didn't talk. He just was there looking at me. And eventually, the vision or whatever it was faded, and I fell back to sleep. Well, the next day we got up, and by then the electricity had come back on, and we had breakfast at the same location. And then for pretty much the remainder of the day, we got to walk around the Hopi reservation. Some of the people invited us into their homes, and they all had dirt floors. And they sweep them out, because I had asked, how do you clean this? And she says, we just take our broom and we sweep the dirt, sweep it right out. And then they do all their cooking in there and everything. And they, on the mesa, there was a high mesa, they each had their own outhouse, and evidently nobody else is allowed to use each other's outhouse. It's each one is assigned to a family, and that's it. And that's the way it is. So that was kind of interesting. They took me to show me their gardens, and coming from Wisconsin and seeing corn planted, we even had a lot of corn in our garden, and they were, as you know, the corn is placed very close together when it grows. Well, on the reservation, there was about 2 feet between each plant, and they were growing blue corn, and there was some yellow corn. But I thought, my goodness, I was so not used to seeing plants placed that far apart that it sort of shocked me, I guess. Like, how can you get enough corn to eat? A few kernels a person, I would think. But anyway, they were growing other things too, like squashes, and I can't remember quite what else, but it was mostly, I think, corn and squash and maybe some root vegetables. And then later we walked around. Like I said, we were walking around just observing everything. And I came upon an Indian woman. She was kneeling by a big flat rock, and she was pounding blue corn with the rock, and she was using a little bit of water. And so I watched her, because I like cooking. It was fascinating to me what she was doing. And she pounded it so expertly into what almost it was like a big burrito, only it was layers of pounded blue corn. And when she was done pounding one of them, she would roll it up and let it dry, and then she would put it in a big jar. Well, as a gift to me, she gave me a whole jar of these rolled blue corn. I called them tortillas, but they weren't, to take with me. And it was, I loved them. They were delicious. And so I took that big jar of them home with me. It was like a big jar, like a big pickle jar you see in restaurants, glass. And so that was the end of that experience, which I really enjoyed, although it was a few years ago. Quite a few years ago, if you want to go there. I really enjoyed that. It'll probably stay with me for a long time. I remember, well, this was when I was in the corporation, but I had a dream, and in the dream I was sleeping on a bed of eagle feathers. They were sticking up vertically, and somebody came to my side and took my arm and tattooed, "You are Sue." So at that point I thought, well, okay, there I was. But we get all these little hints every now and then as to who we were. And of course, now we live with in the now with the new you, and we get our experiences in a totally different place. What's going on now and going on now with you. And there is a new day dawning, that's for sure, especially with me. And, going back to the Indians, they did use, the traditional healers used dance as a part of their healing art. Even the Chinese used dance as part of the healing art and moving the bodies for treating all kinds of physical illnesses and emotional and maybe even mental, as I'm sure they did. When you put music to dance, it is very memorable. You can tell a story with dance, as the hula dancers do in Hawaii. All their hand movements, their hip movements, and the swaying of the body is there a lot of times to emulate nature, the waves and the sun, and the Indians tell stories with their dance. It's easy to become, I don't want to say immersed, but sort of. That makes it memorable. I know when Gene Kelly did his dance, Singing in the Rain, I'm sure everybody remembers that. I mean, it was included singing. He was hanging onto a lamppost. He had fancy footwork. He was skipping down a lane. He was splashing in puddles. But I remember it. West Side Story has a lot of music and dance. The Rumble that I remember. All that jazz from Chicago has dances in it. And The King and I, that was one of my favorites. They danced a fast polka with a really rapid pace. And I mean, there's many more. Even birds dance. There's a couple birds that come to mind. One is the peacock. They have a nice dance when they're trying to attract a mate. And the sandhill cranes also have a dance that we've seen in the fields when they spread their wings out and they dip down and whatever else they think the female will like. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Lipizan horses. They're one of my favorites. My other favorites, the Frisian. But the Lipizan horses are noted as the dancing horses. And they will frequently have performing horses dance to classical music. And there's one YouTube video I watched a long time ago that had a group of Lipizans. Well, it started out with two, and a man had one foot on one back and one foot on the other horse's back. And he was riding them like that, and then he was jumping the poles, jumping over the fence with those, whatever they call them. And he stayed on, and the horses were so in sync. And frequently I noticed they were touching each other's noses. And I'm sure it's like, are you here? Are you there? Where are you? Their peripheral vision isn't the best. Well, it's really good. That's why they wear blinders for racehorses. But they were still touching noses, making sure, I think, they were together. And then they brought out two more horses to go along each side. And then they brought out enough horses so that there were 12 in all. And they would form 4 in the front, 4 in the middle, 4 in the back, and then they would all in sync as each came to its turn jump over the fence or the pole. And I thought, what synchronization, and how beautiful it was that they did that. Usually if you see a horse on TV and he stands on his hind legs and he jumps with his hind legs and his front paws go a little bit, that's probably a Lipizan. They look white, but actually they have black skin, and their fur or their coat hair is white, so they can look gray. They're born dark, but they turn when they get older. But I love to watch them because they dance so pretty. It's one of my favorites.